Today I'll be showing some tricks for making a big, effortless sound in the style of late 19th century Romantic era pianists, particularly Ervin Nyiregyhazi. I'll be showing some of his musical techniques as well. Now, originally I was thinking of taking Nyiregyhazi and speaking about his physical technique, where he makes this huge tone with almost no movement whatsoever. I'll save that for part 2. I'll keep on the musical side of it today. Now, the first thing to talk about, particularly Romantic era players, they often change the notes. They often redistribute them lower down on the keyboard, filling out the texture, those kind of things. I'll show you quite an extreme example on these lines first. Now, I got this idea from Nyiregyhazi. In one of his compositions, Checkmate No. 2, he has a G7 chord. And he takes the low A. That substitutes for a note that does not even exist on this piano. And we can't tell the difference. There's such a thick texture. It just goes by unnoticed. Now, I use this personally in the Bach-Busoni Chaconne. I'll just play you how Busoni wrote it, and then I'll show you the adjustment I made personally. He takes it right down to the lowest note on the keyboard. All of a sudden, he gives up, jumps back an octave. Yeah, the note doesn't exist, so he had no choice. But it's a bit lame, to be honest. It doesn't keep the tension going to the climax. So the solution I came up with personally, I start off by doubling the octave first. Also fill out the chord to take the tension right through to the climax. Yeah, basically, by doubling the octave, if I voice that G and then fill in the A at the bottom, on its own it sounds a bit odd in context. The ear can barely tell the difference between a generic noise down here and the real notes. So yeah, it's a good trick occasionally to use that low note to substitute for notes that don't exist. Now I'll show you, I do that in the Liszt Sonata personally as well. Now, sometimes the reason for a lot of the adjustments that pianists will make is because the texture, sometimes if we don't go far enough, we don't get so many overtones. So if it's a bit in the middle, Liszt writes it this way. Now, he fills out the chord, it's a full texture, it's very full indeed, but in this register, I don't really like it personally. I'll show you how it sounds in the original form. It needs to be very dramatic there. I always want to hold back because I don't feel the texture gives us the chance to make a big sound. If I go all out at it, if I just think, okay, whack it, let's not worry, let's be loud. I can play a lot louder than I did before, but I don't like it. I just think that sounds ugly. So the solution I came up with personally was again to use the A to substitute for notes. I take it down an octave, even to the point where those notes don't exist. So personally, I'll do this. So at the most extreme, there's a B flat major chord where I use the A to substitute for an F. Now, you can't really take it past that, so when I come back to the written register, if I pull out the texture, it still sounds dramatic enough. It doesn't sound like it's lost anything when it goes back up, as long as the texture's full enough. And the reason I do it that way personally is because I have to work less hard to make the big sound. We get more overtones down in this part of the keyboard. The whole keyboard vibrates in sympathy. So rather than blunt force it and make that hideous sound that we hear so often at that point, just whacking the keys, I make the sonority by using the overtones, and it's very common, okay, not so much using the fake A, using the fake note substituted by the A. But yeah, Romantic era pianists, very often they just think, yeah, never mind, they wrote it over there. I'll stick it down there. It makes it so much easier to make the big sound if we're willing to do this on occasions. So moving on, I'll be taking Vallee de Obermann by Liszt, and particularly speaking about some of Nyiregyhazi's techniques. I'm not necessarily saying he does everything as I'm about to show you, but these are all things he does very commonly in general. So I'll play a passage first near the opening. Now there he fills out the texture, like I was saying before. If I play this as written, I don't find any way to make that dramatic without also being ugly. We can blunt force it again, but yeah, it's just ugly to me personally. I actually prefer to use that filling out both in the treble and the bass, and then not have to work terribly hard. Now, it gives you the option, actually. If I wanted to be absolutely crazily explosive, you can do both. You can fill out the texture and make a massive sound. I'll just try that once. For me, I think that's a little bit too wild. But yeah, you can get this kind of middle ground where you take the benefits of the sonority. It gives a real sense of drama, but you're nowhere near working hard yet. You can save that for later in the real climaxes. And now another thing here. Yeah, he doesn't do this actually. I checked his recording. He does this frequently elsewhere, but what I did there, this is really cool. What he does do on his recording, he does that a bit later as it goes on. He really takes over with a lower line of the octave, which not many people tend to do nowadays. What's most common is to voice the top in these kind of passages. But if you voice the middle, actually it gives it almost a bit of ugliness. Not outright hideous sound, but just something slightly kind of earthy to it, basically. So personally, what I do is I spread the whole chord upwards. Say for the left-hand thumb, I do that one last, and that makes it cut through. Nyiregyhazi does this in many other places, not here, but it's very typical of his style. So I do it in this one as well. And then carry on voice in the lower parts. It gives that sense of the big sound without working hard. And actually coming to the opening, in fact, there's a similar thing, very common to play the left hand last. Now, you could say this is a variation on what we hear a lot in the melodies. Say, if I play the Chopin Nocturne, you'll hear loads of people nowadays, as well as old-fashioned players, with a little bit of a delay for that expressive quality. What we don't hear much nowadays is the opposite way around. And literally all it is just wherever the melody is, it doesn't matter if it's left hand, right hand, just have the same delay before the melody note hits, or even the middle one. Again, going back to this, I play everything else first, and then I play the one I want to come through. So it's the same with the opening melody. Nyiregyhazi does absolutely loads of this when he plays it. So it comes last. Now, he tends to go a bit over the top with this. Personally, I wouldn't like to do quite as much as he does. Sometimes it's a little bit kind of like a caricature, a little bit kind of... So what I tend to do, I do a subtle version quite frequently. I might do a really obvious one occasionally to get the attention and make sure the note is heard. Because if the note is heard at the same time as something else, it gets swallowed very easily. We lose the sense of the big sound. If I play that note last, just by the slightest fraction, it may not even sound like it's out of sync necessarily, but it will sound very clear. Actually, I know Godowsky said this. He said if you want to hear distinct voices, don't play them exactly at the same time as each other. It's so much simpler when the one you want to hear has its own isolated quality. And Horowitz was a great master of this as well. In the Scriabin Etude in C sharp minor, you'll hear Horowitz. He always does that. He slightly does that last. Everything else is spread. And then the the one he wants to project in the left-hand thumb. That's the final thing to be heard. Particularly in a concert hall, you'll just hear the sound cutting through from nowhere. You may not even realise it's not in sync. You'll just hear the effortless sonority. And because it's not in time, we don't actually have to play it loud to catch the ear. It's such a valuable trick sometimes. So in the opening, yeah, personally, I try and get some of the Nyiregyhazi kind of quality. If you want a big ringing sound, it's really valuable sometimes to just slightly displace it so it catches the ear. If I try without doing that at all, let's just see. Either it gets a bit lost, it sounds nice, but not very, certainly not really a deep singing quality. So then maybe I'll play louder instead. What's it like if I just use more volume to cut through? Very easily gets very lumpy. So it's a really good one to experiment with, this one. If you want that big ringing sound in your bass, do it the same as I say like this. It's no different. It's just it's the left hand that goes last, not the right. Now, yeah, another passage. Let's get to a big sound again here. I'll just play it a bit first. Now, I wasn't actually playing very loud there. Again, I used a bit of that technique, particularly here, when we get to the pizzante. It's a little bit like this when I did it in slow motion. You slightly roll upwards, potentially, and then play the left hand last. It happens in such a short space of time. Hopefully we don't even notice. But it's so valuable, particularly on the first note there. Catch the ear right from the start of the motif. If I don't do that, if I do it together, it's just swallowed. Again, if I've got to play it loud, literally loud, to come through. Yeah, it's certainly pesante, but where the hell are we going to go after that? And I'll show you as well, the spacing and the pedalling is such a big thing in this kind of sonority. I have to leave a lot of room there. If I play that much straighter just the once, I'll do the same pedalling, but I'll play with much less space in my timing. Everything is swallowed beneath the overtones. We can't hear the distinct quality to the notes. So a really valuable tool. So many people nowadays will have the thing, they get louder, they get faster as well. It's very normal to do that, and sometimes that works. Of course, I'm not saying never do that, but a really valuable one, particularly when we have this thick texture in the bass, if we want that big booming organ-like quality, is actually get slower. And now, if I use the long pedal here, I'm not going to change pedal at all in this bar. Actually, I won't even change pedal here for now. Of course, it's gone too far. I wouldn't play this way for real. But it's an interesting exercise occasionally. If we're too polite, too clean with our pedalling, it can sound incredibly dull sometimes. So I'll try this with regular, more conventional pedalling. You can see how lumpy that sounds. I can't really smooth it over if I'm changing the pedal constantly. If I have a big long pedal, I leave a little bit of room for the sound to clear, then I make sure there's enough projection in the note. It cuts through what's left, it's still heard. So yeah, it's a good trick sometimes. The foot, basically, it's not just about the foot in isolation. If we say someone pedals badly or they pedal well, it's really about the constant interaction between hands and foot. There's no such thing as just having good foot technique, separately from what the hands are doing. And yeah, a lot of the time, we need to do nothing very special with the foot. If we time it the right way, we get the clarity through the timing and the precision with which we achieve the articulation. And because it's a long pedal, we're smoothing things over quite nicely, not getting those abrupt lumps, like with the fast changes. So that, yeah, there's a lot of these factors that go into the big sound, which aren't necessarily the obvious ones. But tell you what, I'll play this passage again. I'll do a similar thing to before. I'll just play it as loud. Yeah, I'll go as loud as I can actually this time. I'll show you, I was holding back before. I was making the impression of the big sound perhaps. This time I'll literally play it loud as well, using a similar approach. Again, it's a bit over the top, I think, maybe. But I hope you can hear between those. It works for both of them, basically. Either you can have something in reserve, and these techniques will give you the impression of a big sound, or if you want to actually genuinely use the big sound, they'll stop it from sounding like this hideous cacophony of notes. Okay, it's a little bit on the blurry side compared to conventional modern playing, but when you give it the space, it still has a presence. We don't just have this mess of notes completely clashing together. At least we can hear the melody coming through, even if we do take it to the extremes. And actually, just coming back to the bass thing as well, actually, I'll just show you a little bit the idea again of using the sonority from the low register. Very often we assume, yeah, low notes, that means a big sound, as in loud. But very often, some of the most interesting ones, when we change the texture, is just this little bit of an upbeat, basically, to the note. Nyiregyhazi does this when he gets to the second statement of the theme. So yeah, the low notes, it's not just about the places where we want to play loud. Again, for the organ-like sonority, sometimes we get this lovely sound by just placing a gentle bass before the real bass note. The whole piano resonates in a different fashion. So again, big sound, it's not all about blunt force. It's about the way the sounds interact together and create the impression of sonority. It doesn't just mean play loud if you want to make a big sound. Anyway, I'll leave it there for now. I'll do a part 2, as I say, speaking about the physical technique that Nyiregyhazi uses. But I think, yeah, for today, that's enough.